Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can drift, and knowledge settles gently like evening light across a still room. Tonight's journey begins with a simple but unsettling question, one that has haunted philosophers, physicists, dreamers, and storytellers for centuries. What if the paradoxes we fear in time travel aren't problems at all, but clues that we've been imagining time entirely wrong? Before we settle in, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if these calm explorations truly bring you comfort. And if you'd like, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. It's always a joy to see how many points on the map quietly gather here each night, each little light connected by curiosity. When you're ready, feel free to dim your room, make yourself comfortable, perhaps let a soft fan hum in the background, and let your mind wander as we begin. Time travel has always carried a kind of forbidden charm, a promise whispered through stories that stretch from ancient myths to modern physics. Yet every time we take even a small step toward imagining how it might work, we immediately crash into paradoxes sharp enough to break the illusion. We picture someone travelling back in time and preventing their own birth, or a piece of information appearing without ever being created, or a traveller changing the past so that their own future collapses like a fragile bridge. These contradictions appear so severe, so tangled, that they have become the standard reason for dismissing time travel entirely. But perhaps the real problem isn't the paradoxes themselves. Perhaps it is the shape of the time we imagine. Perhaps our minds have been trying to understand a vast landscape through the narrow keyhole of a single timeline, and perhaps, very gently, those contradictions are actually invitations to look at time with new eyes. Tonight, we're going to explore a different view, a softer, broader view, one that suggests the universe may be far more accommodating than those harsh paradoxes imply. And as we move forward, we'll travel in the calmest way possible, without rushing, without forcing, letting each idea stretch out like a long exhale, making room for a new theory that resolves paradoxes not by fighting them, but by gently rearranging the way we think about causality itself. Settle in, breathe deeply, and allow yourself to drift. Our first stop is the old, stubborn paradox that has challenged our imagination for decades. There is an oddly gripping question at the heart of nearly every discussion about time travel, and it sits there like a locked door we've been circling for decades. What happens if you go back in time and prevent your own existence? It's a question almost everyone encounters at some point, sometimes through a science fiction novel, sometimes through a late-night thought that arrives uninvited and persistent. This is the essence of the grandfather paradox. Its logic is straightforward, almost childlike. If you travelled to the past and prevented your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, then one of your parents would never be born, which means you would never be born, which means you could never have travelled back in time in the first place. The entire sequence collapses on itself, like a staircase suddenly discovering it has no foundation. The paradox is compelling because it feels airtight. Once you imagine this contradiction, it becomes incredibly difficult to picture any scenario where time travel could be possible without tripping into these impossibilities. It's as if the universe itself is protecting its own timeline with rules we simply cannot bend. But this sense of contradiction arises from a quiet assumption we rarely notice, an assumption that the past is a single, fragile line, and that changing even one small detail would send shockwaves through reality. To better understand why this paradox seems unbreakable, imagine a very simple scene. A traveller steps through a shimmering doorway and finds themselves decades earlier, standing on a quiet street lined with lampposts that glow like living pearls. They walk toward the house where their grandfather once lived. Every step they take seems to pull the future tighter, like strings on a tightened instrument. The paradox whispers, "If you alter anything here, everything unravels." But the paradox only whispers this because we imagine time as a single filament stretched from past to future, delicate and easily snapped. If the thread breaks, the traveller tumbles into nothingness. Yet this thread-like view of time is not the only way to imagine it. It may not even be the most natural way. We imagine the past as fixed because that is how we experience memory. But memory is only a tiny keyhole through which we view the vastness of the world's history. The universe itself may not treat time the way our thoughts do. When we reconsider the grandfather paradox, we notice something interesting. The contradiction doesn't arise from physics, it arises from logic, from how we organise events in our minds. Nature doesn't complain. The paradox exists only in the story we tell about cause and effect. It's like describing a river as if it were a straight line, only to become confused when it bends. The confusion isn't in the river, it's in the picture we drew. And so, the grandfather paradox becomes a doorway, a way of showing that our picture of time may be too simple, that perhaps time is not one thin line at all, but something with depth and shape, something where paradoxes dissolve quietly, the way knots disappear when you loosen the rope instead of pulling it tighter. As we continue our journey tonight, let that question linger. Is the paradox truly a contradiction in reality, or just in our story about it? There is a quiet truth hiding beneath every time travel paradox, a truth so ordinary that we rarely notice it. All of these contradictions depend on a single idea about how time should work. Not how it must work, but how we assume it does. And because the assumption is so familiar, so deeply woven into our everyday experience, we mistake it for a rule of nature instead of what it truly is, a habit of thought. To see this more clearly, imagine for a moment the way most of us picture time. We tend to imagine a single line stretching from left to right, the past behind us, the future ahead of us. The line feels clean and narrow. It promises that events follow one another in an orderly chain, each link connected to the next. This view of time is comforting in its simplicity. It suggests that if you know where you stand on the line, you know what has happened and what might happen. Everything fits into place. But this familiar picture is also the very thing that gives paradoxes their power. The grandfather paradox, the self-inflicted paradox, the bootstrap paradox. Each one only seems impossible because we imagine time as a single thread that can be disrupted. When we assume the structure of time is fragile, even the smallest disturbance appears capable of unravelling the entire tapestry. Consider a traveller holding a letter from the future. In the narrow line view of time, this act immediately creates a contradiction. Information appears without origin, like a sentence that has no writer. But if we loosen the assumption, if we let time breathe, widen, unfold, the contradiction dissolves. The information might come from a different arrangement of events, or from a path that loops gently around itself. The paradox feels rigid only because the model is rigid. The same thing happens with causal loops, those strange stories where an effect becomes its own cause. They seem impossible only because we imagine that causes must always precede effects on a single pathway. When we picture time like a straight hallway, everything must follow the same direction. But if time is more like a network of corridors, some looping back, some branching out, then causal loops become patterns rather than contradictions. They are like circular footpaths in a peaceful garden, unusual if you expect every trail to go forward, but perfectly natural if you understand the shape of the space. This idea becomes even clearer when we look at the notion of self-healing consistency. Physicists sometimes describe it as the universe ensuring, that contradictions cannot occur. The soft version of this principle says, whenever a traveller attempts to create a paradox, the universe gently nudges events into a configuration that avoids contradiction. There are no sharp corrections, no violent rearrangements, only subtle shifts, almost like a breeze brushing the surface of a pond to smooth out a ripple. But even this principle rests on an assumption, the assumption that time has a preferred shape, one that naturally steers events toward coherence. It suggests that the universe does not break its own narrative. Instead of allowing a traveller to disrupt the past entirely, it encourages outcomes that preserve a seamless flow, much like an author revising a chapter so the story remains intact. Yet this still feels strange when we hold on to the single-line view of time. It raises questions. Why must the universe prevent contradictions? Why can a traveller not simply force a break in the chain? Why does the past seem so resistant to being rewritten? The softness of the answer lies in recognising that our picture of time might be too narrow. If time is not a line but something broader, something layered, textured or multidimensional, then paradoxes are not obstacles, they are signposts pointing toward a bigger landscape. The paradoxes themselves are telling us that our mental model is incomplete. To understand this more intuitively, imagine a book you've read many times. When you reopen it to a familiar chapter, the characters feel fixed, the events predetermined. But the book itself contains every page at once. Nothing within it is truly before or after. The order exists only in the act of reading. If you were somehow able to jump backward from chapter 8 to chapter 3, the story would not collapse in confusion. You would simply be standing in a different part of the book, one that already exists. The paradox appears only if you insist that the story must rewrite itself to match your movement. In a similar way, the paradoxes of time travel arise because we insist that the past must bend to the traveller. But what if the past does not bend at all? What if the traveller is the one who shifts? This shift in perspective opens a gentle door to more flexible models of time, models where our familiar line becomes a pathway through a larger terrain. Models where contradictions do not form because each event already has its place in the broader structure. And once we entertain the possibility that our everyday assumptions are incomplete, the paradoxes begin to soften. They lose their sharp edges. The grandfather paradox becomes less like a trap and more like a riddle pointing to a deeper understanding. The invisible assumption behind almost every paradox is the belief in a single fragile timeline. When we loosen this belief, just a little, the knots begin to untangle, and the universe feels less like a delicate thread and more like something open, expansive, and quietly resilient. As we drift further into this exploration, keep this thought close. Paradoxes are not warnings. They're invitations. Invitations to reimagine the shape of time itself. There is a certain type of time travel story that feels even stranger than the grandfather paradox, not because it breaks anything, but because it seems to create something out of nothing. It begins quietly. A melody appears in someone's mind, a brilliant invention appears in someone's notebook, or a weathered book appears on a doorstep without an author. These stories feel eerie not because they contain contradictions, but because they lack origins. They describe objects, ideas, or events that arise in closed loops, feeding themselves through time with no beginning at all. This is the essence of a bootstrap paradox, sometimes called an information loop. To picture this gently, imagine a traveller moving through time with a small music box. They found it on a dusty shelf in their old home and brought it back with them on their journey. While visiting the past, they leave the music box behind by accident. A younger version of themselves later discovers it, carries it through life, and eventually takes it with them on their journey into the past. The loop closes. The music box exists, but has no real creator. No single moment you can point to and say, here is where it began. It is a loop floating in the river of time like a tiny whirlpool that keeps swirling without ever forming or fading. And although it might seem impossible at first glance, it does not break any rule of logic. Instead, it quietly challenges our idea that everything must have a clear point of origin. The same kind of loop can happen with information. One of the gentlest examples is a story about a mathematician who receives a mysterious envelope under her door. Inside is the solution to a complicated problem she's been wrestling with for years. Grateful and relieved, she later becomes a celebrated figure in her field and keeps the mysterious solution safe among her papers. Decades later, while preparing for a journey to the past as part of an experiment, she decides to leave the envelope at her younger self's doorstep as an act of kindness. And so, the loop completes itself. The solution came from the future, then returned to the past without ever being created in any traditional sense. These loops seem to disturb something deep within us because we instinctively believe that events should follow a neat chain of causes. A cause leads to an effect. The effect becomes a new cause. Everything traces back to a spark, a beginning. The bootstrap paradox pulls that spark away. It creates a circle with no obvious starting point. But circles are not contradictions, they are shapes. And the moment we see that, the fear dissolves. The real source of discomfort comes from how we imagine time. When we think of time as a straight line, the loop looks impossible. But if we imagine time as a landscape filled with twisting paths and quiet spirals, then the loop becomes just another feature. It's like discovering a perfectly round pond in a forest. There is no contradiction in its existence. It is simply shaped that way. Even physicists exploring the structure of time have found ways to describe such loops in their equations, though we will avoid the symbols themselves here. Instead of imagining time as a rigid sequence, some theories imagine it as a flexible surface capable of bending back onto itself in certain regions. In those regions, events can flow in circles, just as water can circle in an eddy. The patterns are stable because the surface itself supports them. When viewed this way, the bootstrap paradox becomes less like a problem and more like a natural consequence of time having more structure than we expect. It suggests that not every event needs an origin in the traditional sense. Some events exist because the geometry of time allows them to exist. A melody might not need a composer if time itself holds the melody in a loop. Of course, this raises an unsettling question. If a melody or a book or a piece of knowledge can loop through time without ever being created, what does that mean about the nature of information? Does it mean information can exist independently of a mind? Or does it simply mean that information can be passed between different moments in such a way that its origin becomes irrelevant? To answer this gently, imagine a candle flame reflected between two mirrors facing each other. You see an endless series of reflections receding into the distance, each image containing the flame but none creating it. They simply exist because the mirrors face one another. In the same way, a loop in time may hold an idea, a physical object, or even an action, not because it was created from nothing, but because the structure of time allows it to echo around itself. When we let the bootstrap paradox settle into this softer picture, we realize something important. It never claimed to break the universe. It only demonstrated that our idea of beginning and end may be too tied to our everyday experience. We think of stories as starting at page 1 and ending at the final chapter. But if time is a book where the pages can fold, wrap, or touch, then some stories don't have beginnings in the usual sense. They have shapes instead. The bootstrap paradox also nudges us toward a deeper understanding of causality. It gently suggests that causality may not be a strict ladder of events climbing toward the future. It might be more like a tapestry where threads loop, braid, and return. Some loops are small, some are wide, but all are part of the same fabric. If you follow a single thread too rigidly, you might become confused, but if you step back and see the whole pattern, it makes sense. This realization prepares us for a broader view of time. The bootstrap paradox is not simply a curiosity, it is a doorway. It hints that time may have dimensions we do not instinctively perceive, and if objects and ideas can travel through loops without contradiction, then perhaps the past, present, and future are not separate compartments. Perhaps they are regions of the same continuous landscape, connected in ways we are only beginning to imagine. As we drift toward this new view, hold on to the quiet idea that not every mystery is a flaw. Some mysteries are gentle signals pointing us toward a more expansive understanding of reality and our place within it. There is a quiet moment that often arrives after someone has spent enough time thinking about the famous paradoxes of time travel. It is not dramatic, and it does not announce itself loudly. It is simply a soft conclusion forming beneath all the confusion. Maybe time travel is impossible because the past is too delicate to touch. The paradoxes seem to tell us that the past is made of fragile glass, that even the smallest disturbance would shatter everything that follows. And so we begin to picture time as something we must tiptoe around, something that becomes dangerous the moment we imagine stepping back into it. This belief, gentle, intuitive, and almost comforting, has shaped how people talk about time travel for decades. Movies warn us not to change anything in the past. Stories revolve around characters struggling to preserve the timeline. Even scientific discussions often begin with statements about preventing contradictions. It feels as though everyone quietly agrees that the past is a single, narrow path. If you alter one stone on the path, the future collapses like a series of dominoes. But this sense of fragility arises not from the nature of time itself, but from the story we tell about it. We imagine time as a string pulled tight between past and future, and we assume that cutting or tying a knot in this string will create a disaster. Our imaginations are so trained by this narrative that it becomes difficult to see alternatives. When someone suggests time travel might be possible, we immediately summon images of erasing oneself from existence or breaking the chain of cause and effect. The paradoxes feel like guardians standing at the gate telling us that the past cannot be touched. To understand why this belief feels so natural, imagine watching a line of dominoes stretched across a long table. Each piece stands perfectly spaced, waiting for the first gentle tap. When the chain reaction begins, the sequence feels inevitable. Every fall is caused by the fall before it. If you remove one domino or shift it slightly, the entire sequence changes. This is the model of time we carry in our minds, a simple, orderly chain of causes leading to effects. But time, as the universe understands it, is not a line of dominoes. It is not a rigid chain. It is far more flexible, far more spacious. The domino image is appealing because it gives us a sense of control and predictability, and paradoxes use that image against us. They rely on the idea that changing even one domino in the past would necessarily warp every future piece. The grandfather paradox, the self-inflicted paradox, the bootstrap paradox, they all assume that the timeline must remain singular and fragile. If we remove this assumption, the paradoxes suddenly lose their force. To see how this works, imagine time as something wider, like a broad river flowing through a valley. You can step into different parts of the river. You can walk along the bank and see its curves from multiple angles. If you disturb a handful of water, the river does not collapse. It simply absorbs the movement and continues flowing. When we picture time this way, the idea of causing a paradox feels less like breaking something and more like creating a ripple that settles naturally. This broader view becomes even clearer when we consider the gentle idea of self-consistency. In softer terms, it means that the universe prefers stories that do not contradict themselves. If someone travels to the past and attempts to change something that would make their journey impossible, events simply unfold in a way that prevents the contradiction. Not by force, not by rewriting reality, but through subtle shifts, small coincidences, minor missteps, a door that closes at just the right moment, or a conversation that takes a slightly different turn. These tiny adjustments keep the story coherent. This idea may sound almost magical, but we see similar patterns in nature all the time. A river flows around obstacles, a tree grows around a stone, a melody adjusts to the hand that plays it. Nature prefers coherence, but it rarely enforces it with harsh rules. It guides gently, making room for consistency without breaking the structure. Yet many still conclude that time travel must be impossible because paradoxes appear too quickly and too sharply. There is a sense that if the universe has to intervene to prevent contradictions, then something unnatural must be happening. But the intervention is only necessary in the strictly linear view of time, the view where one path must remain unchanged. The deeper reason traditional time travel feels impossible is because we confine it to too small a space. We imagine time as a single corridor, narrow and dim. If someone walks backward through that corridor, we fear they might bump into walls, knock things over, or erase themselves. But if we step back and widen the view, the corridor becomes a network of pathways. The walls fall away, movement becomes possible. Instead of imagining a single sequence that must remain untouched, we begin to see time as a landscape that can accommodate many movements at once. This shift is crucial because it hints at something important. Paradoxes are not evidence that time travel breaks reality. They are evidence that our picture of time is incomplete. If time were truly as fragile as a chain of dominoes, then paradoxes would indeed be fatal flaws. But if time is more like a tapestry woven from many threads, then pulling or shifting one thread does not unravel the whole. It simply changes the shape of a small region while the rest remains intact. The traditional view of time makes time travel seem impossible because it forces us to imagine one past, one present, and one future. But the universe may be far more generous. It may hold many layers of causality, many configurations, many pathways. The paradoxes arise only when we try to compress this richness into a single line. As we prepare to leave these familiar paradoxes behind and wander into broader terrain, let this thought rest lightly in your mind. The impossibility of time travel is not a verdict delivered by nature. It is a boundary drawn by our imagination, and boundaries, once noticed, are easier to step beyond. For most of our lives, we carry a quiet assumption about time without ever questioning it, that time flows in only one direction, along a single, narrow line. We treat this line almost like a railway track, one route, one sequence, one story that moves steadily forward without branching. This picture is simple, intuitive, and deeply comforting. It corresponds with the way we remember our own lives. We are born, we grow, we learn, and we age. Our memories come in an order that feels fixed, but the more deeply we look at the universe, the more this familiar picture begins to soften. Imagine standing on a hillside overlooking a vast valley at dawn. Through the mist you can see rivers splitting and rejoining, quiet paths winding around one another, and layers of land stacked against the horizon. From this vantage point, it becomes easy to accept something we rarely consider. Nature does not form straight lines unless it must. Rivers do not flow in a single direction without wandering. Roots do not grow in perfect symmetry. Even the orbits of planets, though orderly. are not perfect circles but gentle ellipses shaped by the pull of other bodies. Straight lines in many ways are the exception, not the rule. Perhaps time is no different. Some physicists describe time not as a line, but as something more like a fabric or a landscape, broad, deep and textured. In the softest interpretation of this idea, the past, present and future do not exist as isolated points arranged in a straight row. Instead, they coexist like regions on a map. You do not change the past any more than you change the shape of a mountain by looking at it from a different angle. You simply arrive at a different part of the landscape. This idea connects gently to a model often called the block universe. Though we will avoid technical details, the essence is simple. Every moment in time exists in the same way every location in space exists. Yesterday is a place, tomorrow is a place, this moment is a place. Just as walking across a field does not create or destroy the field, moving through time, slowly or suddenly, does not rewrite the past or sculpt the future. All these regions exist quietly, each with its own structure. When we imagine time as a landscape, something beautiful happens. Paradoxes begin to lose their power. A paradox only feels impossible when time is a single thread. If time is a landscape, then stepping from one region to another does not risk breaking anything. You cannot undo the past any more than you can remove a hill by standing somewhere else. You can only change your location within the larger terrain. To make this idea more intuitive, imagine a traveller in a balloon drifting gently over a valley. From below, someone walking along a narrow path sees only the winding trail in front of them. They imagine that this trail defines the world. But from above, the traveller sees dozens of trails, all connected, all part of the same landscape. The walker's path is real, but not exclusive. There are countless others they cannot see because their viewpoint is limited. The traditional view of time is like the walker's path, real but narrow. The multi-dimensional view is like the balloon, expansive, peaceful, and full of possibilities. This broader picture also helps explain why the past feels fixed. In a landscape, mountains do not crumble when you look at them. Lakes do not rearrange themselves when you stand at their shore. They remain exactly as they are, waiting quietly. In the same way, the past may feel fixed not because it is fragile, but because it is a region of time already shaped. A traveller could visit it, explore it, even interact with it, just as you can walk through an old forest without disturbing its roots, but they would not rewrite it any more than your footsteps rewrite the forest's history. This perspective might seem abstract at first, but it rests on a gentle truth. Our experience of time is not the same as time itself. Our minds perceive time through memory, which creates the illusion of a thin line. But physics suggests something wider. When we strip away the assumptions built into memory, what remains is not a line but a field. A field where the traveller is never trapped, where every moment has its place, and where movement does not threaten the integrity of the whole. There's also a quiet comfort in this idea. If time is a landscape, then nothing is ever lost. Moments do not vanish into non-existence. They remain forever as regions on the map, accessible in the grand structure of reality, even if not accessible in our daily experience. This does not mean we can easily visit them, but it means that they do not simply dissolve. They persist with a kind of gentle dignity. As we embrace this more spacious view, we begin to see how time travel might not require rewriting the past, but simply navigating through the landscape of time. A traveller could step from one region to another, the way someone might step from a valley into a forest clearing. The past would not be fragile, it would be one of many places to explore. This shift in perspective is not just philosophical, it is practical. It dissolves the sharpest paradoxes before they even form. It turns impossibilities into gentle puzzles, and it makes space for a new kind of theory, one that treats time as a living environment full of paths and patterns waiting for us to understand it. As we drift further along this valley of ideas, keep this in mind. Once time becomes a landscape, movement becomes natural, and the impossible becomes quietly possible. There is a moment, once you begin imagining time as a wide landscape instead of a narrow line, when a new possibility quietly emerges. What if time does not simply stretch forward, but branches? Not in the dramatic, chaotic sense of worlds multiplying endlessly with every breath, but in the gentler, more natural way rivers divide as they move through a valley. A river may begin as a single flow, but as it travels it encounters rocks, soil and gentle slopes that guide it into separate paths. Each branch is real, each carries part of the same water, and though they may diverge, they remain part of the same river system. If time can behave the same way, then many of the paradoxes that seem so intimidating begin to soften. A paradox is troubling only when we insist on a single history, when we imagine that every event must follow precisely from the one before it, with no variations allowed. But if reality can support multiple histories, each one coherent, each one complete, then a traveller stepping into the past does not risk tearing anything apart. They simply arrive in a branch of the river where events flow naturally around their presence. To picture this in a soft, intuitive way, imagine walking along the bank of a river that splits into two currents. The left branch flows around a stand of willow trees, its water calm and clear. The right branch curls around a bed of rocks, creating tiny whirlpools that shimmer in the sunlight. If you place your hand into one branch, you affect only that part of the river. The other branch continues unchanged, and yet both branches belong to the same valley, shaped by the same landscape. This image gives us a gentle way to understand parallel histories. They're not violent splits in reality, nor do they require endless duplications of the universe. Instead, they arise from the structure of time itself, its ability to accommodate differences without contradiction, a choice made here, a coincidence happening there, a traveller stepping back into a moment. Each can guide the flow into a slightly different path. People sometimes speak of alternate timelines, but the phrase can sound harsh or mechanical. It can conjure images of universes splitting like glass under strain. A softer way to think of them is as neighbouring pathways. Each path is as real as any other, and each tells its own version of the story. The traveller does not create these paths. They simply reach one that already exists within the broader landscape. One of the gentlest illustrations of this idea involves a simple childhood memory. Imagine you're a child standing at a fork in a garden trail. You can walk left toward the orchard or right toward the pond. No matter which way you choose, the other trail remains. It does not vanish when you turn away from it. It continues quietly, full of its own possibilities, flowers blooming, insects humming, leaves shifting with the breeze. Your experience does not erase the other path. It merely reveals the one you follow. Time, viewed as a landscape, can contain both trails without conflict. This perspective becomes especially helpful when we think about the grandfather paradox. In the single-line view of time, a traveller who returns to the past and interferes with a key event risks destroying their own history. But in the branching river view, the traveller simply steps into a branch where events unfold differently. Their original history remains intact, flowing along one branch, while their actions create or activate another branch that carries a different sequence of events. The past is not rewritten. The traveller is simply standing in a different place along the banks of the river. Even physics, when translated gently into imagery, supports this idea. In the quantum world, tiny particles often behave as though multiple outcomes coexist. not in the rigid sense of separate universes multiplying uncontrollably, but in the soft sense that nature allows more than one possibility before selecting a particular path. It's as if reality waits for a gentle nudge before choosing which branch of the river to follow. In the everyday world, we experience something similar on a more human scale. Every choice we make feels like a narrowing. We choose one road to walk home instead of another. We decide to speak or remain silent. We turn left instead of right. Yet even though we experience only one path, we understand that many plausible paths existed at that moment. They lived quietly as possibilities. In the parallel history's view, those possibilities are not discarded but woven into the broader structure of time. This does not mean that every tiny decision creates a dramatic new world. Most branches differ so subtly that the difference is more like a ripple than a rupture. Two branches may run almost parallel, their waters barely distinguishable. In others, the split may be more pronounced, but the idea remains the same. The structure of time can hold many variations without collapsing. A gentle way to visualize this is to picture a leaf floating down a river. At a branch, the leaf might drift left or right depending on the slightest movements in the water. Both possibilities are real, both paths are part of the river. Yet the leaf experiences only one. A traveller moving through time might simply follow a different current, one that already exists, one that fits their presence, one that accommodates their arrival instead of resisting it. This broader idea prepares us for an even deeper one. If parallel histories exist as natural features of time, then time travel is no longer about changing what was, but about visiting what is already there. A traveller does not rewrite the past. They inhabit one of its branches. They do not destroy their own future. They step onto a neighbouring path where the future unfolds differently. And most importantly, they do not cause contradictions because each branch remains self-consistent within its own flow. As we continue across this landscape, gently following these rivers and their branches, a new shape of time begins to emerge, one that is generous, flexible, and quietly resilient. A shape where movement is possible, paradoxes lose their sharp teeth, and the traveller becomes a quiet observer in a much larger interconnected whole. There is a quiet and somewhat surprising idea that emerges once we allow time to be more than a single line. If time can branch like rivers, then perhaps some of those branches are not entirely independent. Perhaps they remain connected in subtle, delicate ways that shape the flow of events without ever forcing them. This idea becomes especially intriguing when we explore it through the softened lens of modern physics, translated into gentle imagery. To begin, imagine two lanterns hanging on opposite sides of a quiet garden. They are far apart, yet the glow of one seems to shift whenever the other brightens, as though they share a silent conversation through the light itself. Their connection is not physical in the usual sense. It is more like a resonance, a shared rhythm. If you picture timelines as lanterns glowing in the vast landscape of time, then entangled timelines are the lanterns that lean toward each other, influencing the hue of the light they cast. In the world of quantum physics, particles can become entangled, a word that sounds tangled and complicated, but its deepest essence is simple. Two particles, no matter how far apart, can share a relationship so deep that when one changes, the other responds instantly, not through a signal or a message, but because their states are woven together like two threads in the same knot. While this phenomenon is subtle and delicate in the physical world, we can gently borrow its spirit to imagine timelines that share a connection that allows them to balance one another, soothe contradictions, and cooperate in the shared architecture of reality. To understand this more intuitively, imagine walking along a coastline where waves arrive in pairs. One wave touches the shore, and a moment later another wave, generated far away, arrives with a matching rhythm. Though they come from different parts of the ocean, they carry a shared signature. They belong to the same pattern. In the same way, two timelines might carry matching rhythms or shared events, even if their details differ. They are distinct yet connected. Now, why does this matter for time travel? Because paradoxes arise only when we assume that timelines must operate independently and strictly. A paradox such as the grandfather paradox assumes that a change in one storyline must disrupt a single, fragile chain of events. But if timelines can be entangled, if events in one branch can echo softly in another, then contradictions become much harder to produce. Instead of breaking, the structure adjusts. Imagine a traveller stepping into a past that belongs to a branch parallel to their own. If the two branches are entangled, then certain events, especially the foundational ones, may remain synchronized across them. The traveller's presence might influence details, but the deeper structure holds shape. It's like two melodies played on different instruments. They can express variations, yet their underlying notes remain aligned. The coherence between them prevents discord. To picture this even more gently, imagine standing in a hall of mirrors where some reflections are faint, others bright, but all share a common pose even if the angles differ. If you lift your hand, some reflections follow exactly, others follow with a slight delay. Others shift the gesture subtly but still remain tied to your movement. The reflections do not duplicate you perfectly, but they remain connected in a way that prevents any of them from turning into contradictions of one another. They move with you because they are entangled with your form. In the same way, entangled timelines can adjust themselves gracefully when a traveller enters their flow. Instead of becoming contradictory, I exist, I do not exist, the timelines shift into compatible states. The traveller does not break the story. They find themselves inside a variation that already knows how to hold them. It is as though the timeline prepared a space for their arrival long before they stepped into it. This leads to a profound and calming idea. Time does not resist travellers, it accommodates them, not by bending the rules violently, but by offering pathways where contradictions simply never arise. And these pathways are stitched together by the quiet relationships between timelines. Relationships we can think of as entanglement. Some modern theories explore a similar idea, though they often speak in the language of formulas and abstract geometry. Instead of symbols, let's imagine this idea in terms of a tapestry. Each thread in the tapestry is a timeline. Some threads cross over each other, touching briefly. Some run parallel without ever meeting, and some twist together, forming patterns so interwoven that they cannot be separated without altering the entire design. These twisting threads are the entangled timelines, distinct but held together by shared structure. In such a tapestry, loops and branches are not errors, they are part of the beauty. A loop in one section is supported by the arrangement of threads around it. A shift in one corner ripples softly through the fabric, but does not tear it. Nothing is fragile. Everything is held in place by connections we do not always see. This soothing image helps us understand how entangled timelines make paradoxes much less threatening. A traveller stepping into an entangled timeline does not risk breaking their own history or overwriting someone else's. Instead, the timeline flexes, adjusts, and aligns with the traveller's presence. The contradictions dissolve into harmony. Even more remarkably, entangled timelines introduce a new possibility. Events can influence one another across branches without causing chaos. A choice in one timeline might echo gently in another, guiding it toward patterns that remain consistent, not as a rule enforced by nature, but as a natural flow of the entanglement itself. like two trees growing side by side whose branches sometimes touch and sway together in the wind. With this gentler, more spacious understanding, time becomes not a brittle thread, but a woven field. In this field, travellers are not intruders. They are simply wanderers moving through regions already shaped to receive them, and paradoxes, though sharp, familiar warnings, fade into soft puzzles that reveal the richness of the landscape rather than its limits. As we drift forward in this exploration, keep this image close. Timelines are not isolated islands. They are lanterns glowing across a shared night, connected by light we cannot always see. If you stand quietly enough in the middle of a room, sometimes you begin to sense the space around you, not just the objects in it, but the shape of the space itself, the way sound moves through it, the way light seems to settle into its corners. Space, even when empty, has architecture. Time, as strange as it sounds, may have architecture as well. And once we begin thinking of time as a landscape instead of a line, we can gently start exploring the structures within it, structures that nature may allow, but that our everyday experience hides from us. Consider a simple image, a hallway that loops back onto itself. If you walked through it without paying much attention, you might not even notice you had returned to the same point. The hallway would feel continuous, smooth, and natural, even if it folded silently into a circle. This image gives us a soft way to approach one of the stranger predictions of Einstein's theory of space-time. The idea that, under the right conditions, time might bend back toward its own past, forming what physicists call closed time-like curves. But rather than leaning on the terminology, imagine these curves as corridors that lead not forward or backward in the usual sense, but back to a moment that feels familiar, like returning to a room whose lights are still warm from your earlier presence. These corridors, if they exist, would not behave like abrupt tunnels ripped open by force. They would be gentler, shaped by the curvature of space-time itself. The fabric of reality can bend in ways our senses cannot detect, ways that become more visible only when gravity is strong enough, or when space folds in intricate patterns. In fiction, time travel devices are machines of steel and gears. In the universe's own imagination, the machinery is geometry. To picture this softness, imagine a long ribbon lying on a table. If you pinch 2 points and bend the ribbon so that the points touch, you create a shortcut across its surface. The ribbon has not torn, it has simply folded. A traveller moving along the ribbon could step from one point to another faster than someone walking the full length. If you imagine the ribbon not as fabric but as space-time itself, then this gentle folding becomes a gateway, a path where events that would normally be far apart lie side by side. Science often uses the term wormhole to describe such shortcuts, but the name feels harsher and more biological than the idea deserves. Instead, think of them as quiet bridges that nature might form between distant points, like stepping stones placed just close enough to cross a stream without getting your feet wet. These bridges, if stable enough, could let someone move from one moment to another the way someone might drift through connected rooms in a house. But space-time is not always cooperative. The structure of reality may allow these bridges to form only under delicate conditions as fragile as a soap bubble floating in still air. If the bubble shimmers even slightly, it collapses. In the same way, certain shapes of space-time might exist only briefly before returning to simpler forms, but the possibility itself is enough to invite curiosity. Even if these structures last only for an instant, the idea that time can fold suggests that its geometry is richer than anything we experience in our everyday lives. Loops, corridors, and gateways are not the only features in this hidden architecture. Some regions of space-time may behave like valleys that funnel events together. Others may behave like plateaus where the flow of time feels slower, stretched out by the shape of gravity. Even without delving into formulas, it is enough to imagine that time flows differently in different terrains, just as rivers move quickly through steep canyons and slow into gentle curves across wide plains. In this gentle exploration, a question naturally arises. If time can have such complex structures, why do we not notice them? The answer is quiet and simple. We experience time from within. We are like travellers walking through a dense forest. Our steps feel linear because the path beneath our feet is local and narrow. The forest may be vast and full of winding routes, but our senses show us only the trail we're on. Our memories move in only one direction because memories are created as we go. We remember the path behind us because we walked it. We do not remember the path beside us because we never stepped onto it. But the map of time may contain far more than the path we recall. It may be full of rooms, corridors, loops and bridges that exist whether we walk them or not. The structures remain hidden because our experience is linear, not because the universe is. This perspective turns paradoxes into opportunities. Instead of rejecting the idea of time travel because we fear contradictions, we can imagine travellers moving through the architecture of time the way one might explore an old mansion with interconnected halls. They would not break anything, they would simply choose different passageways. A loop might let them walk into a moment twice. A corridor might lead them to an earlier event without erasing the journey they've already taken. A gateway might connect two distant moments, letting them step between them without interfering with the walls that hold the house together. Not all of these structures need to exist physically the way we imagine. Some may be metaphors that help us understand deeper truths about causality. Others may exist only under extreme conditions, the kinds of conditions found near collapsing stars or in regions where gravity bends light like water. Still others may exist quietly at the quantum level, where time behaves in ways far subtler and gentler than our senses can detect. But whether literal or metaphorical, each of these structures suggests the same comforting idea. Time is spacious. It has room. It can hold far more possibilities than we see from our narrow human perspective. And travellers, if they ever learn to navigate this architecture, might find that the past is not a fragile relic, but a place full of hidden corridors waiting to be explored. As we drift toward the next part of our journey, carry this image with you. Time is not a straight hallway with a locked door at one end. It is a vast home with many rooms, some familiar, some hidden, all connected by an architecture that is more generous than our imaginations once allowed. There is a moment in every long inquiry when the scattered threads begin to gather, not in a dramatic revelation, but in a gentle settling, like dust drifting into patterns of meaning. We've wandered through paradoxes and puzzles, through rivers that split and lanterns that glow across distant timelines, and through corridors where time folds back on itself like softened ribbon. Along the way, we've quietly loosened one assumption after another, letting go of the idea that time is narrow, fragile, or easily broken. And now, as these threads draw together, a new shape begins to appear in the dim light. A shape that suggests time might be more generous, more layered, and more peaceful than we ever thought. The Coexistence Principle emerges from this softening of perspective. Its heart is simple, and yet its simplicity holds surprising depth. It suggests that all possible outcomes of events already coexist, not in a chaotic explosion of competing realities, but in a structured, harmonious field of possibilities. Imagine time not as a straight path winding through darkness, but as a library whose shelves stretch beyond sight. On each shelf sits a version of a story, a quiet book in which events unfold in a particular way. Some chapters match perfectly from one book to another. Others diverge as gently as branches separating in a forest. None overwrite the others. None need to be erased. They coexist in the same grand archive. This principle immediately resolves the fear at the heart of every paradox. A time traveller does not change the past. They merely step into one of the books where their arrival already makes sense. The universe does not scramble to repair contradictions because contradictions never form. The traveller does not rip pages from the book they came from. They simply walk into another book whose pages are written to include their presence. And their original book, the one containing the story of their childhood, their memories, their decisions, remains untouched, resting safely on its own shelf. To understand this gently, imagine you are standing in a quiet library at night. The lights are soft. Dust motes drift like tiny stars. You hold a book in your hands, your book, the story of your life so far. You open it. The chapters feel familiar. But around you, row after row of shelves holds countless other versions of that story, some nearly identical, others shifting with subtle variations. In one version, you chose a different school. In another, you made a different friend. In yet another, a stranger's kindness changed the direction of your day. And somewhere among these shelves lie the books where a time traveller visited your past, or where you visited your own. The Coexistence Principle says, all these books already exist. You do not create them, you navigate them. This idea might sound grand, but it rests on a gentle truth about choice. We often imagine free will as something that creates the future, sculpting it moment by moment. But perhaps free will is not the act of creating the path. Perhaps it is the act of choosing which path to walk into. The paths exist whether or not we choose them. Our choices illuminate them. In this view, free will becomes softer, not a dramatic proclamation of power, but a quiet act of awareness. When you choose something, you're not summoning a new world out of nothing. You're stepping into one that fits the choice you made. This view of free will also explains something about time travel in a remarkably peaceful way. A traveller stepping into the past is not forcing the past to change. They are simply shifting their awareness to a region of the time landscape where that visit already fits. It is like stepping from one room in the library to another, each room complete, each room coherent, each room welcoming in its own way. To explore this further, imagine a painter standing before a wall covered entirely in small frames. Each frame holds a tiny canvas, some bright, some muted, some nearly blank. When the painter touches one canvas with the tip of a brush, their gesture does not erase the others. It simply adds colour to that particular square. The Coexistence Principle suggests that each timeline is one canvas among many, and that a traveller's presence colours only the canvas they step into. The others remain untouched. The entire wall of canvases continues to exist, forming a mosaic that reflects the full range of possibilities. This approach also resolves something that has troubled philosophers and physicists for decades, the question of contradictions. In the single-line version of time, the traveller forces an impossible demand on the past, be the same and also be different. But in the Coexistence Principle, this demand never arises. The traveller doesn't ask the past to change at all. They enter a branch where the conditions already align with their arrival. The past and future remain consistent within each branch, and every branch respects its own internal logic. It feels almost like watching a river split at a gentle fork. The water does not argue with itself, it simply flows into two directions simultaneously. The Coexistence Principle sees time in the same way. The river is not confused, it is abundant. Another comforting thought follows from this view. Nothing is lost. The traveller's original world continues. Their memories remain authentic, their path still exists. They have simply stepped into another room in the vast mansion of time, one where different furniture sits under different lights, but which still belongs to the same structure. This is why the coexistence principle is not a theory of chaos, but of harmony. It does not require radical physics or violent splitting. It treats time as something spacious enough to hold all possibilities without strain. And once we let this idea settle gently in our minds, the old paradoxes begin to melt. They were knots tied by our insistence on a single thread. When the thread becomes a tapestry, the knots unravel on their own. As we continue deeper into this new view of time, keep the image of the library close. Every version of every story already rests quietly on its shelf. No paradox can tear a page from the book you lived. No contradiction can break the spine of a story that already exists. You do not force time to change, you choose which chapter to read next. When people first imagine time travel, they often picture machines, complex towers of gears, humming coils of energy, or shimmering rings spinning fast enough to tear a hole through the years. But when we look more gently at the ideas we have explored, something surprisingly simple begins to emerge. Perhaps the most important part of time travel is not the machinery at all. Perhaps the traveller's own awareness, the quiet light inside the mind, is the true compass that guides movement through the landscape of time. This shift in perspective may feel subtle, yet it carries profound implications. In the coexistence principle, where all outcomes exist across quiet branches of possibility, the traveller does not force their way into a new past. They drift, almost like a lantern carried by a soft wind, into the branch that naturally aligns with their presence. The movement is not mechanical, it is experiential. It is not about bending the universe, but about stepping into a version of reality where the traveller already belongs. To picture this gently, imagine walking through a large house at night while holding a lantern. Everywhere you go, the lantern brings light with it. Rooms that were dim become warm and visible. Hallways that seemed uncertain become safe places to walk. But the lantern does not change the house itself. It simply illuminates the part of the house you occupy. In the same way, consciousness might not create or rewrite timelines. It might simply illuminate the branch of time it steps into, revealing the path that was always waiting. This idea fits naturally with the branching river view of time we explored earlier. When a traveller shifts awareness to a particular branch, they enter the flow that suits their presence. It is as though time itself whispers, "Here is the path where you make sense." The traveller is not breaking continuity, but finding the continuity that includes them. Just as a lantern reveals the corridor that is ready to receive its light, awareness seeks out the timeline that can hold it without contradiction. One of the gentlest ways to understand this is through the image of a hall of mirrors. Imagine standing in a quiet room lined with mirrors on every wall. Each mirror reflects a slightly different angle of the same figure, some reflections brighter, some dimmer, some shifted by subtle distortions. If you walk toward a particular reflection, you do not become that reflection in any literal sense, but your awareness aligns with it. The moment feels natural because that reflection already exists, waiting for your gaze. In this analogy, each reflection is a branch of time. Consciousness chooses the direction to walk, and the mirror that catches your attention becomes the version of reality you step into. This is not a literal description, of course, but it captures the softness of the idea. Awareness navigates the structure of time by aligning with the branch that feels coherent. When travellers imagine moving into the past, they often fear contradictions, fear that they will arrive in a moment where their presence would tear the story apart. But in the coexistence principle, awareness moves the way water finds its own level. It does not choose impossible branches. It harmonizes with paths where it can fit. This harmony is deeply connected to how consciousness experiences time even in ordinary life. Consider how memories work. A memory is not the past. It is reconstruction of the past that your awareness visits. When you remember a moment from childhood, you do not travel physically, yet you inhabit a space within your mind that feels vivid. Consciousness knows how to move through time internally. It slips into old chapters effortlessly. This does not mean memory is time travel, but it reveals that awareness is already capable of moving across temporal structures. Now, imagine extending this ability outward into the physical landscape of time itself. Instead of visiting a memory within the mind, awareness steps into a timeline that contains the moment being sought. No rules are broken because the traveller arrives where the story includes them. They do not need to modify events to fit themselves into the past. They appear in the branch where their presence is part of the natural order. The elegance of this idea becomes clearer when we think about contradiction. In a single-line timeline, contradiction is always waiting. The traveller risks breaking the chain of causes, but in a landscape full of branches, contradiction is only found on paths that consciousness does not walk. Awareness selects the branches that accept it. This selection is not an act of force, it is an act of compatibility, the way a key fits only a door shaped to receive it. The traveller's awareness moves where the logic already holds them. This process might feel abstract, but everyday experiences hint at it. Consider intuition. Those moments when you feel drawn toward a choice that seems right without knowing why. Or the way some memories feel brighter, more magnetic than others. Or the way certain possibilities feel open while others feel closed. These sensations may not be cosmic, but they illustrate a principle. Awareness gravitates toward coherence, toward paths that resonate with the traveller's inner state. Time travel, under the Coexistence Principle, simply magnifies this process. Instead of choosing between two actions or two emotions, consciousness might choose between two branches of space-time, selecting the one that aligns with the traveller's presence, the one where no paradox forms. Just as a lantern does not light the entire world but reveals a path as it moves, awareness might illuminate the particular thread of time where it naturally belongs. This perspective also softens the intimidating idea of altering the past. The traveller does not alter anything. They align with a version of events that accommodates them. The landscape remains whole. No histories are destroyed. No futures are undone. The traveller becomes a visitor stepping into a corridor where their footsteps are already part of the architecture. As we drift deeper into this new understanding of time, keep this image close. Consciousness is not a hammer striking the timeline but a light moving through it. It reveals the spaces where it fits, joins the stories already shaped, and navigates the vast library of reality with the quiet grace of a lantern carried through endless halls. The grandfather paradox has always stood like a tall gate at the entrance to time travel, looming with the quiet threat of contradiction. For decades, it has been held up as the definitive reason time travel must be impossible. The logic appears unbreakable. If you go back in time and prevent an ancestor from living long enough to create the branch of history that leads to you, then your own existence collapses. And if your existence collapses, then who travelled back? And if no one travelled back, then nothing was prevented. The story ties itself into a knot so tight that it seems only natural to conclude that time travel must not be allowed. But this story relies on a single assumption, that there is only one version of the past, a solitary line, a narrow hallway with no doors along the sides. Once you let go of that assumption, once you imagine time as a landscape of many paths, all coexisting, the knot begins to loosen. Paradox dissolves, not through clever tricks or mathematical escape routes, but through softness. the kind of softness that comes from imagining a past that is spacious enough to hold more than one possibility. Let us revisit the paradox gently. Imagine a traveller stepping into a shimmering corridor that leads into an earlier moment in their family's history. They arrive in a small village, years before their birth, before their parents were born, before their grandparents met. In the traditional single-line view of time, this arrival is dangerous. Anything the traveller does might tear apart the fragile chain of causes that eventually produce them, and if they interrupt even one link in that chain, the future they came from collapses. This is the paradox. A traveller's actions nullify the very conditions that allowed them to act. But in the coexistence principle, the traveller is not walking backward along a single chain. They are stepping sideways into a neighbouring branch, one of the many possible histories that share deep similarities with their original world, but which diverges quietly in key moments. When the traveller appears in this branch, the universe does not panic. It does not scramble to rewrite the traveller's origin or collapse under contradiction. It simply continues along the course that belongs to this branch. If the traveller interacts with their grandfather, perhaps saving him, perhaps harming him, perhaps changing a moment of his life in a way that alters everything that follows, those actions affect only the branch the traveller has entered, the world the traveller came from, the world containing the long chain of events that led to their birth, remains intact on its own shelf in the library of time. The traveller's presence changes nothing in that original story. Their memories remain true. Their existence remains secure. They were born in one story and stepped into another. This soft shift in perspective solves the paradox completely. To understand why, imagine standing before two parallel garden paths. Both paths begin at the same wooden gate, but after a few meters, one curves left and the other curves right. If you walk down the right-hand path, you might never see the pond that lies along the left. But the pond exists whether or not you walk toward it. It is simply part of the landscape. If later you decide to explore the left-hand path, you do not erase the memory of having walked the right-hand one. You simply step into a different experience. Both remain real. In the same way, a traveller can step into a past where their grandfather's story unfolds differently. A past where the garden gate opens onto a path that never leads to the traveller's original timeline. This does not threaten the traveller's existence because the traveller's existence belongs to another branch, one that continues undisturbed. The beauty of the coexistence principle is that it does not require any forceful rewriting of events. It does not demand that the universe protect the timeline or enforce perfect consistency through invisible rules. Instead, it simply acknowledges that reality already contains many consistent branches, and that consciousness naturally aligns with the branch that fits its presence. When the traveller steps into the past, they are stepping into a version of the story where their arrival coherently belongs, perhaps as a mysterious stranger, perhaps as a catalyst for different events, perhaps as a silent observer. This removes the fear that the traveller might erase themselves. They cannot erase themselves because they do not exist only in one place. Their origin is fixed in the branch where they lived, grew, and chose to travel. That origin remains untouched, like a book resting safely on its shelf. The traveller's actions in another branch may create profound changes, altering futures, shaping new destinies, but these changes are local to that branch. The library loses no books, it simply reveals another volume. There is also a soft emotional dimension to this idea. The traveller may feel a quiet sadness or wonder upon realising that they are no longer interacting with the exact past that produced them, but they are interacting with a past that is real, alive, and capable of unfolding its own story. They may even help shape a new lineage, a new series of events, a new chain of causes that lead to people who never existed in their original world. Instead of erasing their family tree, they are nurturing a different one, planting new roots in a neighbouring garden. Think of it this way: the paradox is not a conflict, it is an overlap. A traveller born in one thread of time steps into another thread, and the threads do not tangle, they weave gently, each maintaining its own integrity. The traveller becomes a bridge between stories, not a destroyer of them. The grandfather paradox felt impossible only because we imagined one world struggling against itself. But when we imagine many worlds coexisting peacefully, the contradiction dissolves. The universe does not tear, it expands. It holds every possibility, every path, every version of events without needing to erase or rewrite anything. As we drift further into this new landscape, carry this understanding with you. You were born in one story, and you may someday find yourself stepping into another. Both remain true, both remain yours, and neither depends on erasing the other. Among all the paradoxes we've wandered through, the information paradox has always possessed a certain haunting beauty. Unlike the grandfather paradox, which threatens existence directly, the information paradox challenges something subtler: the origin of knowledge. It asks with quiet persistence, where does an idea come from if it is passed through time in a loop? And more importantly, does every idea require a single, identifiable beginning? Imagine a book that appears one morning on the doorstep of a writer. It is worn, its pages soft with age. The author's name on the cover matches the writer's own name, though they do not remember ever composing it. Inside lies a story they have never thought of but somehow recognise, a story they feel connected to, as if they might have written it someday. The writer keeps the book, wondering whether it is a gift from a future self or a strange accident. Many years later, as this writer grows older and finally completes a journey through time, they bring the same book with them, and leave it gently on their own doorstep in the past. The loop closes. The book has no clear origin. It simply exists. This is the essence of the information paradox. It feels mysterious because it defies the way we think stories should work. We expect a beginning, a middle, and an end. We expect a cause before an effect. But what happens when a cause is also its own effect? Does the loop violate logic, or does it simply challenge a pattern we've grown accustomed to? The coexistence principle offers a gentle, elegant answer. The idea was not created from nothing. It was accessed across branches of time. Just as a traveller steps into a timeline that already holds a place for them, information can flow across branches that already contain a version of that knowledge. The insight, the object, or the creation does not emerge without origin. It moves through the architecture of time in a way that feels unconventional, but remains entirely coherent. To imagine this softly, picture a network of small ponds scattered across a meadow. Some ponds are connected by visible streams, while others are linked by underground channels you cannot see. If a drop of coloured dye is placed into one pond, the colour may slowly appear in another through these hidden pathways. The dye does not magically create itself. It simply travels by following connections that are not immediately visible. In the same way, information may appear to loop because it follows subtle channels between branches of time, channels shaped by the coexistence principle. When a traveller brings knowledge from the future into the past, they're not creating the knowledge from nothing. They're carrying it from one branch to another, much like a butterfly carrying pollen between flowers. The pollen did not emerge from nowhere. It simply found a new home. And in the gentle logic of the coexistence principle, the idea survives not by violating causality, but by inhabiting multiple homes at once. Even though we avoid technical language here, some physicists have explored ideas similar to this through the lens of self-consistent information loops, patterns in which information is preserved across different structures of time without needing a single originating point. But instead of symbols and equations, we can think of these loops as patterns in a tapestry. A motif may appear in several sections of the fabric, supported by the threads that weave through the cloth. You may not be able to locate the first instance of the motif because it is woven throughout the design. The pattern exists because the tapestry supports it. In the same way, an idea may appear in several branches of time because the structure of time supports its presence across those branches. This reframing dissolves the discomfort at the centre of the paradox. The question, who wrote the book, becomes less important than recognising that the book finds a consistent place in the landscape of time. The story exists because the conditions of the branch support it, and as the book moves between branches, it does not violate causality any more than a river violates nature by splitting into tributaries and rejoining miles later. There is something deeply human in this understanding. Ideas often feel as though they come from nowhere. A melody arrives in the middle of the night. A sudden insight appears during a quiet walk. A line of poetry slips into mind like a whisper from a forgotten dream. We treat these moments as inspiration, but they share an emotional resemblance to the information paradox. Something arrives without a clear origin, and yet it feels familiar. Perhaps this resemblance is only metaphorical, but it shows how natural the sensation of originless information can be. Our minds are comfortable with mystery long before our logic is. Returning to time travel, the information paradox becomes less like a flaw and more like a natural consequence of a world where multiple timelines coexist. If knowledge moves through these branches just as travellers do, then loops of information are simply expressions of the deeper architecture. Knowledge is not created out of nothing. It is carried, shared, echoed, passed gently along pathways that connect different versions of events. This also means that information does not need a single birthplace. An idea can belong to many branches at once. A book can be written in one branch and delivered in another. A melody can be composed in one world and carried backward into a world where it becomes timeless. Once we accept that time is spacious and layered, the question, where did it begin, becomes less sharp. The origin becomes a constellation rather than a point, and perhaps that is the softest resolution of all. In a universe where many stories coexist, knowledge does not need a single author. It needs only a place to land. As we move from the paradoxes of information toward the broader implications of time travel, hold on to this image. Information flows like a current through many channels. It can pass from one branch to another, not to violate the order of things, but to enrich the tapestry of possibilities. And in this tapestry, every thread has a home. As we step across the threshold into a new part of our exploration, something gentle and reassuring begins to emerge. After walking through paradoxes, wandering through branching rivers, and drifting among timelines that lean softly toward one another, we arrive at a realization that feels almost like a deep exhale. Time travel does not need to be a force of destruction. It does not need to be a tool for rewriting history or correcting mistakes. It does not have to bear the weight of impossible choices. Instead, it can be something quieter, something closer to witnessing. This idea becomes easier to hold once we embrace the coexistence principle. If all possible branches of events already coexist, each one complete and coherent, then stepping into the past is not the act of breaking a delicate sequence. It is more like opening a long-forgotten diary or walking through an old photograph. You enter a moment that exists independently of you. You do not damage its authenticity by being present. You simply join it for a while. To understand this softly, imagine standing in a quiet museum late in the afternoon. The skylight above you lets in a thin beam of pale golden light. You wander through the rooms at your own pace. One room holds a medieval tapestry, threadbare but beautiful. Another displays letters written centuries ago by people whose names you've never heard. You walk slowly, observe quietly, feel the weight of lives long past, but nothing you do changes the artifacts. They remain what they already are, and yet your experience of them is real and meaningful. This is what time travel becomes under the Coexistence Principle, a museum with living rooms, moments you can step into, moments you can feel, moments you can understand, but not moments you can break. Traditionally, people imagine time travel as a dangerous power, one that could unravel everything with a single careless action. Touch the wrong object, speak the wrong word, step on the wrong stone, and the future collapses. This version of time travel feels like holding a tool made of glass and electricity, fragile yet explosive. But that danger comes from imagining time as a single history. A solitary thread cannot handle too much movement. It must be protected at all costs. Once time becomes a landscape full of branches that fear dissolves. A time traveller does not threaten the future they came from because their future rests safely on its own branch. Whatever they see or do in another branch cannot erase their original path. They are exploring, not editing. Imagine walking through a forest with many trails. Some were created decades ago. Others formed naturally as animals moved through the trees. When you choose a trail to explore, you do not destroy the others. Your footsteps do not erase paths you are not walking. You witness one piece of the forest, while the rest of the forest continues in quiet fullness. Time, under this new view, behaves the same way. To step into one branch is simply to walk one of the trails. This understanding also transforms how we interpret interaction. Time travel stories often warn that talking to people in the past could cause immense damage. But in a coexistence-based model, speaking with someone in a past branch is no more destructive than speaking with a stranger in a city you are visiting. You may influence their life, you may touch their story, but you're not uprooting your own. You're simply becoming part of a timeline that has its own future, a future not bound to yours. The comfort of this idea grows when we consider how memory works. When we revisit the past through memory, we do not change it. We simply access it. We become witnesses to a moment that exists in the fabric of our minds. Time travel, in its gentlest form, may be an external analogue of that internal experience, a quiet revisiting, not a rewriting. This perspective also leads to a small but important emotional shift. Many people fantasize about time travel because they wish to fix something, to undo a mistake, to save a loved one, to choose differently. Others fear time travel because they worry that someone else could change the past and erase what they love. But if time is a landscape, then neither fear nor desire needs to take the shape we usually give them. The past does not need fixing because your version of the past already exists, and no one can erase it, because branches do not overwrite one another, they coexist. Imagine holding a photograph of a childhood moment, perhaps a birthday party, a quiet morning, a walk with someone you miss. Even if you could travel back to that moment physically, what you would visit is not the fragile original, but a branch where that moment lives with its own integrity. The photograph still exists in your hands. The memory still lives in your mind, and the moment in that branch continues unfolding, untouched by the weight of contradiction. When time travel becomes witnessing, its nature changes entirely. It becomes an act of curiosity rather than intervention. It becomes a way of understanding history intimately, compassionately. It becomes a way to walk through the chapters of the world with gentleness instead of fear. Wandering through the past becomes like wandering through an old city at twilight. You hear voices echo from alleyways. You see warm windows filled with scenes you do not belong to, but can observe with quiet respect. You feel the pulse of lives that shaped the world, not because you are there to change them, but because your presence allows you to understand them more deeply. Under the Coexistence Principle, time travel does not give you the burden of omnipotence. It gives you the gift of perspective. It allows you to walk through histories without rewriting them, to witness moments without breaking them, to understand without altering. And so time travel shifts from being a weapon capable of destroying the timeline to a lantern carried by a wanderer, revealing, illuminating and honouring the paths already laid before you. When time loses its rigidity and becomes a landscape of many branches, each one complete, each one coherent, the moral weight of time travel shifts in a profound way. The old fear of changing history dissolves like frost in morning light, replaced not by recklessness but by a gentler, more thoughtful question. How should one behave when stepping into a reality that is not their own? If time travel is no longer an act of altering but an act of witnessing and wandering, then the ethics of it becomes less about preventing catastrophe and more about moving through the world with respect. To approach this softly, imagine entering a house that has stood for centuries. You open the door, and the air inside carries a faint scent of old wood and forgotten stories. Every room holds traces of the lives that passed through it. Some objects are fragile, some sturdy, some worn by years of touch. You walk slowly, careful not to disturb what rests on the shelves. Not because the house might collapse, but because you understand you are a guest in a story already written. This sense of respectful presence becomes the foundation of ethical time travel under the Coexistence Principle. Traditional stories portray time travelers as dangerous figures, people who could, by a single careless action, erase entire histories or uproot the existence of countless individuals. But once we understand that every timeline is its own branch, and that one branch cannot destroy another, the ethical burden changes. Instead of worrying about collapsing the future, the traveller must consider the more intimate question of how their presence might influence the people and events of the branch they visit. This is similar to travelling anywhere in the world. You would not tear pages from a city's history simply by visiting it, but your presence could still matter. You could change a conversation, alter someone's day, or shift the small currents of a life you encounter. These effects do not threaten your own world, but they do shape the world you step into. To illustrate this gently, imagine walking across a field covered in fresh snow. Each step leaves a mark, not deep enough to reshape the landscape, but visible enough to matter. The snow will fall again, the marks will fade. But in the quiet moment of walking, you have changed the scene, even if only slightly. Ethical time travel becomes a matter of choosing how to place those steps, not with fear, but with care. This is where the idea of observational responsibility comes in. It does not mean avoiding contact altogether. Complete detachment is neither realistic nor necessary. It simply means being mindful, aware that you are entering a life that has its own momentum, its own hopes, its own threads of causality. Your presence is part of the branch now, and your actions ripple gently through it. These ripples do not threaten the fabric of reality, but they deserve consideration because they touch real people with real futures. Time travel becomes less like altering a delicate mechanism and more like entering a garden that is already in bloom. You can walk among the flowers, you can smell the earth, feel the morning warmth, hear the soft rustle of leaves, but you understand that your steps move the petals, that your presence enters the ecosystem. Even without paradox, ethics remain. Some travellers might feel tempted by the idea that branching realities dilute responsibility. that their choices no longer matter because each branch has its own self-contained destiny. But this perspective misses something important. Every branch is a world. Every world contains people whose experiences are as real within their context as yours are within yours. When you act within a branch, you contribute to the lives moving through it. You may not be responsible for maintaining the timeline, but you are responsible for how you inhabit it. To express this softly, imagine a row of wind chimes hanging outside a quiet home. A traveller passing by creates a small breeze. The chimes ring gently, not loudly, not enough to disturb anyone, but enough to create a moment of sound that would not have existed otherwise. This is the nature of existence within any timeline. Even without catastrophic consequences, our presence always creates a small resonance. Ethics is the act of noticing that resonance and choosing how to contribute to it. This perspective also invites a broader, as more compassionate understanding of free will. Under the coexistence principle, free will exists not as a power to reshape reality, but as the ability to choose how to move through it. Travelers do not shape the timeline, but they shape their conduct within it. They shape their understanding, their relationships, their impressions. And those choices, though contained within a branch, carry emotional and moral significance. There is another layer to ethical time travel, one that rests on a quieter truth. When we encounter a different branch of time, we're also encountering different versions of the world we know, perhaps even versions of people we once loved. These encounters should be approached with tenderness. You may see someone who resembles a friend or relative, but whose life has moved through different conditions. You may feel the pull of nostalgia or the ache of unresolved memories. Ethical presence requires acknowledging that this version of the person belongs to this branch, not to your expectations. Respecting their autonomy becomes an act of gentle humility. In this way, time travel becomes a teacher of empathy. It reminds us that every life unfolds according to its own logic, shaped by events we cannot see and choices we do not fully understand. Moving through many timelines becomes a lesson in appreciating difference without imposing ourselves upon it. As we reach the end of this session, hold on to this thought. When time is a landscape and every branch holds its own truth, the role of the traveller is not to fix, correct, or dominate. It is to witness, to listen, to step softly. To move with the understanding that even in a world full of coexisting possibilities, our presence still carries meaning. And perhaps, in learning how to walk gently through another reality, we also learn how to walk more gently through our own. There is a quiet comfort in realizing that the universe may be far more patient, far more accommodating than our early fears ever allowed us to believe. For much of human history, causality, the relationship between cause and effect, has been imagined as a rigid chain, each link forged in place, each moment entirely dependent on the one before it. This chain feels strong, unbreakable, and reassuring in its certainty, but it also feels fragile. If even one link were disturbed, if someone travelled into the past and nudged a moment ever so slightly, the entire chain seemed at risk of snapping. But now, standing in the landscape we have explored so far, the chain dissolves into something more spacious. Causality becomes not a narrow set of links, but something closer to a constellation, a pattern in the sky, formed from points of light that relate to one another, not through rigid attachment, but through the gentle lines we draw between them. These patterns exist because the universe is wide enough for them. They find harmony simply by belonging to a larger structure. Under the coexistence principle, the universe does not struggle to prevent contradictions. It simply does not create them. Every version of events that exists across the branches of time is inherently coherent. The universe does not need to protect its chronology. It does not need to fix time when someone travels into the past. Instead, it quietly offers a path where the traveller's presence already fits. Reality remains self-consistent not through force, but through design. To understand this softly, imagine a flock of birds sweeping across an evening sky. Each bird moves according to its own rhythm, but the flock maintains a coherent shape. When one bird shifts to avoid a gust of wind, the others adjust naturally, not through panic or confusion, but through the quiet intelligence of their shared motion. The flock never contradicts itself because each of its members responds to the broader pattern. Causality in a multi-branch reality may behave in a similar way, flexible, responsive, always coherent even when individual paths diverge. When people worry about paradoxes, they're often fearing a universe that can fall apart under pressure. They imagine causality as brittle glass, one fracture and everything shatters. But the coexistence principle reveals something different, a universe that behaves more like woven cloth. Pull on one thread and the fabric does not tear. It simply reshapes, accommodating the tension across its many strands. In this view, the future of causality is not linear but expansive. Instead of a single sequence of events marching forward in lockstep, causality becomes a dynamic network of possibilities, each allowed to unfold in harmony with the others. No branch overwrites another. No future erases another. Each one finds its place within the constellation of timelines. This approach also reshapes how we think about prediction. In the old model, predicting the future meant following the single line of causality forward and trying to anticipate what would happen next. But in a branching universe, prediction becomes more like forecasting the weather. You identify patterns, you observe the conditions, and you acknowledge that many paths may be possible. Some futures bloom gently from small decisions, others rise from subtle coincidences. And yet, even in this variety, the universe remains consistent. Just as storms and sunrises coexist within the same sky, so do branches of causality coexist within the same structure of time. To illustrate this gently, imagine a great tree in a quiet meadow. Each branch grows outward in its own direction. Some branches turn sharply, others stretch gracefully, and some divide into smaller limbs. When you look closely, each branch tells a slightly different story of growth, yet all of them belong to the same tree. None contradict the existence of the others. The tree does not need to prune itself to maintain coherence. It simply grows. The universe, in this sense, may be a tree of possibilities. Each branch is a timeline. Each leaf is a moment. Each growth pattern emerges from a quiet dialogue between what has happened and what might happen. When a time traveller steps into the past, they do not snap a branch in half. They step onto another limb, one that has been growing quietly alongside their own all along. This perspective offers something unexpected, a sense of safety. If the universe is built in such a way that contradictions cannot arise, not because they are forbidden, but because the architecture doesn't support them, then time travel becomes far less frightening. A traveller cannot undo themselves. They cannot break the world. They cannot destroy the conditions that produced them. They can only move between branches that naturally support their presence. This, in turn, changes how we think about destiny. Fate is no longer a single thread to follow or resist. It becomes a horizon with many paths leading toward it. Every choice we make illuminates one of those paths. But even the paths we do not choose continue to exist, quietly unfolding in the background. Our lives, then, are not restricted to a single possibility. They are one melody among many, each playing within the greater symphony of time. This view of causality also helps resolve the deeper emotional fears attached to time travel. Some fear losing the people they love, imagining a timeline where a single change erases them. but the coexistence principle gently assures us that nothing is erased. The world you came from remains whole. The people you love still exist on their branch, living the futures that belong to them, and if you encounter different versions of them in other branches, those versions are not replacements. They are variations, reflections, siblings of possibility. As we drift toward the final part of this exploration, hold on to this idea. The universe does not contradict itself because it does not need to. Every path has room to exist. Every outcome has a home. And we, as travellers through our own narrow slice of this vast architecture, are already part of a reality far more generous than we ever imagined. As our long journey through time, causality, branches and gentle paradoxes comes to a close, it's worth taking a moment to breathe, to let the ideas settle like dust drifting quietly in the late afternoon sun. We have wandered through a world where time is not an arrow but a landscape, where events do not demand a single storyline, and where a traveller stepping into the past does not break reality, but simply enters a different corridor of possibility. What remains now is to gather these threads into a soft final reflection, a contemplation of what it means for us, here and now, to live within such an expansive design. One of the most comforting conclusions of the coexistence principle is that nothing is ever truly lost. Not in the harsh sense of permanence, but in the gentle sense of continuity. Every moment you have lived, every joy, every mistake, every small decision still exists as one branch in the vast tapestry of time. It doesn't vanish when you move forward. It doesn't crumble when you choose differently. It becomes a region in the landscape, a thread woven into the larger fabric, and in that sense your life is both a story and a place. To understand this, imagine standing before a tapestry hundreds of meters wide, woven from strands of every colour you can imagine: deep blues, soft golds, muted greens, warm reds. Some threads run long and straight, others twist into spirals or braids. Some are thick with meaning, others are slender and quiet. As you look closer, you notice that each thread tells a story. No single story dominates the whole. Instead, the beauty of the tapestry lies in the coexistence of all of them, woven together into something larger than any individual thread could be. Your life is one of those threads, and the branches of time we've explored are the variations, each one carrying a slightly different hue, shaped by choices made and choices unmade. None of them cancel the others. None of them replace what came before. They share the tapestry together peacefully. This perspective softens how we think about identity. We often imagine ourselves as singular beings defined by a single chain of events, born at a particular moment, shaped by a particular childhood, walking along a single timeline that stretches forward. But once time becomes a tapestry, identity becomes more spacious. You're not just the thread you're weaving right now. You're also connected to the threads woven from moments you didn't choose, from possibilities you didn't follow, from quiet paths that unfolded without you. And yet, all of them contribute to the richness of the tapestry you inhabit. This doesn't mean you are scattered or divided. It means the world around you is richer than you imagine, holding space for your story and every other story it touches. When viewed through this lens, time travel becomes less like an extraordinary adventure and more like a metaphor for everyday experience. You may never step physically into the past, but every memory is a soft kind of time travel. Every regret is a glimpse into a branch you did not walk. Every dream of the future is a moment spent wandering into a possible tomorrow. Your awareness moves through time constantly, not through machinery or corridors, but through attention, imagination, emotion. And just like the traveller in the branching universe, Your movement does not destroy the paths you leave behind. It simply reveals the one you are inhabiting. This understanding also transforms how we relate to uncertainty. Many people fear the future because they imagine it as a single thread stretching into the unknown. But if the future is a constellation of possibilities, then uncertainty becomes less like a void and more like a garden, a place filled with paths you might take, each one already existing quietly waiting for your arrival. You do not create these futures, you choose which ones to walk into. And whichever path you choose, the others do not vanish. They remain part of the tapestry, parallel, silent, full of their own beauty. This view can bring a surprising kind of peace. It tells us that we do not need to be perfect. Every choice we make is simply one thread among many. Every misstep is a part of one branch, but there are other branches where we learned differently, where we chose differently, where we grew in other ways. You are never reduced to a single version of yourself. You're a traveller among possibilities. Even our fears about time travel, fear of losing loved ones, fear of erasing ourselves, fear of breaking the world, soften in this light. The people we love remain on the branch where they exist. The futures that belong to them continue. Even if a traveller steps into a different branch and meets different versions of those they care about, the original versions are still there, still alive, woven into the tapestry forever. This leads us to a gentle, final realization. We are already time travellers. Not in the science fiction sense of metal machines and glowing portals, but in the quiet human sense of drifting moment to moment, choosing paths from among countless possibilities, watching memories recede behind us and futures draw near. We move across the tapestry with every breath. The Coexistence Principle reveals that this movement is not fragile. It is not precarious. It is supported by a universe wide enough for every thread. A universe where contradictions cannot tear the fabric because the fabric was never woven with a single strand. A universe where your story matters, not because it defines everything, but because it belongs among everything. As our journey ends, imagine yourself standing once more before the great tapestry, feeling the softness of its threads beneath your fingertips. Somewhere in its expanse is the branch you're living right now, stretching forward into paths you have yet to illuminate. Somewhere else are the branches you might visit, the memories you might explore, the possibilities you have not yet touched. All of them exist. All of them belong. And you, in your quiet movement across the fabric, are part of the universe's patient unfolding. You do not walk alone. You walk through a world that holds every version of itself gently, inviting you to witness, to explore, and to rest in the comfort that time, in all its vastness, never needs to contradict itself to hold you.